to this section. Now we'll take a look at the third move e6 for black here against the Rossolimo. So, this move e6 is the second most popular move in this position, just slightly, or not slightly, but just behind the most popular move g6. So, black plays e6, and this move is very solid and has been favored by a lot of strong grandmasters over the last years, but also recently. For example, the world champion Magnus Carlsen has played this move in a few games. Top Azerbaijan player Teymur Radkovich has also played this in the past, but also recently with very good results with the black pieces. Let's see, Boris Gelfand has also played this amongst many others. But this move is definitely a serious variation, and we need to pay particular attention to it. I think personally, in my opinion, g6 is slightly stronger and is a bit more solid, but e6 nevertheless is also very combative. And here in this position, white has a choice whether to take on c6 or not. And in this course, I'm going to be recommending short castle with, taking on c6 is also a good move, and then after black takes with the b pawn, and white gives up the bishop pair, but in return he makes black's pawn structure on the queen side look static, and his bishop on c8 will be quite passive for a while because his most natural diagonals have been closed off. So this is certainly very interesting for white also. But at the same time, white gives up the bishop pair so early in the game. And I think short castle also gives white some opportunities to try to get a slight advantage. After short castle, black usually plays knight e7, and this is the point of playing e6 a move earlier. Black wants to place his knight here where it protects the c6 square, and the next move black plays a6. So that if white takes on c6, then he is able to recapture with the knight, and that was the entire point of the variation. And in addition, later this knight can go to the g6 square. Sorry for the wrong arrows. Knight can move here later, or alternatively black can play d5, and since the knight is already on e7, he can recapture on d5 with the knight. We should also take a look at queen c7 as a possibility, because this position can also arise under the move order 3 queen c7, but here we just play rook e1 and no problem. If a6, then we take on c6, followed by the move d4. Meanwhile, after knight e7, then we play c3 with the idea of seizing the center with d4. And after bishop f1, black's queen on c7 is quite misplaced. After d4, we occupy the center, and therefore black has to take. And after knight c3, the position of the queen here on e7 is not the best. After bishop e7, black is behind in development, and white can attack the pawn on g7 by playing rook g4. And now it's too dangerous for black to castle short because of bishop h6. And meanwhile, after bishop f6, knight e4, we grab the bishop on f6, and black's dark squares remain vulnerable after bishop d7. We can take on f6, but b3 is even stronger. And now bishop d6 is a serious threat. Black has to play here, but after takes, black's king side is vulnerable, and his king's position on the queen side is not very stable either. As black has a lot of weaknesses on the dark squares. So on move 4, knight e7 is a lot more common and is almost exclusively played. And here white has a bunch of different and also good alternatives. In this course, I'm going to be recommending rook d4. And this is a modern line. It's not the main line, I believe, but it's nevertheless very good also. Besides d4, white has other good tries. On move 5, the classical main line in this position is c3, in order to try to in order to try to control the entire center of the board by playing the move d4. And there have been some games here. Normally the games continue with a6, trying to win the bishop pair, but white unsurprisingly preserves it. Bishop e7, and now after rook e1, black plays rook c8 with the idea to create counterplay on the c file if white plays d4. Meanwhile, white usually goes here with the move a4, trying to put pressure on black's queen side. And the games usually go b4, then white plays d4 with the idea to play d5 next move. And the position is quite complex and both sides have chances. Black has to defend accurately. Meanwhile, at move 5, the other main alternative is rook e1. This is also the classical line, and here black has a choice. I believe his best move here is a6 on move 5. When, again, white can decide whether to take on c6 or not. If white plays bishop f1, black plays d5, trading off the pawns on the center. And after d4, Boris Gelfand has defended this position many times with the black pieces by playing knight f6. Yeah, I believe we played knight f6. So Gelfand has played this. Magnus has tried it once. If I remember correctly. Yeah, Boris has been playing this line since 2013. Meanwhile, recently black found the new idea c takes d4, and then this very interesting move, knight to b4, attacking our knight and also the c6 square, or sorry, the c2 square. And after takes, queen d1, rook d1, b takes, knight a3. Black plays the move a5 with the idea to trade off the light squared bishops by playing bishop a6. White is probably very slightly better here still after bishop d2. And then, yeah, black plays bishop a6, but this position looks interesting for both sides. But alternatively on move 8, maybe knight f6 is also a bit worse for black, but very close to equality. Meanwhile, the line with bishop takes c6 followed by d4 looks interesting for white. So white gives up the bishop pair, but in return we get the quick initiative in the center. Our rook is well placed, our knight is well placed. Black plays queen c7 here to be able to recapture on c6 with the queen. And after the continuation knight takes c6, black can either take with the pawn or take with the queen. Queen takes c6. And the position is quite complex. White has a lead in development, but black has the bishop pair. And the position is unclear. White generally plays knight c3 to develop the knight. But in any case, yeah. So rook e1 is interesting too. Black can play knight d4. I actually have played this myself with the black pieces for a few games a long time ago. Knight d4, the idea is after takes, black has the double pawns, but he wants to be able to secure the center with knight c6. And after c3, a6, black has a solid position, but I suspect that white is slightly better here. After say d3 or even b4 with the idea to advance on the queen side, but nevertheless, yeah. So as you can see on move 5, in this position white has an abundance of ideas. They don't necessarily guarantee an advantage for white in every line, but Nevertheless, you could pose your opponent with some interesting problems to solve over the board. So white has a lot of ideas. And on move 5, I'm suggesting here d4, which is a move that I like. And I've also played this move. Let's see, I think I played it a couple of times with the white pieces. And ever since the famous game Fabiano Caruana against Boris Gelfand, ever since he beat Boris Gelfand in this model game, let's see, I think it was 2013. Yeah, ever since that famous game, I almost always had a personal liking to this move. So this is what I'm suggesting. And the idea is that after takes, we get this position similar to the open Sicilian, but black's knight on e7 is not in the best square. In the Sicilian, the knight is almost always better placed on f6, which is the most natural square for the knight. But in addition, we have also castle, so we have a small lead in development. And also in addition, our knight is still on b1, so in some cases, we can actually set up a Maroczy bind position by playing c4. So here after knight takes d4, there have been, let's see, hundreds of games. Yeah, hundreds of games in this position, and black usually almost always chooses queen b6. And the reason why he does so is because he attacks both our minor pieces, and he forces us to make a concession by taking on c6, which we don't have to if black doesn't play queen b6. Nevertheless, let's take a look at black's other possibilities. He can play a6 to attack our bishop, and I mean, if we take on c6, then black gets the bishop pair. So we can actually play bishop e2 and preserve the bishops. If black takes on d4 after queen d4, we transpose to the variation analyzed under knight takes d4, move 5. And if black plays d5, this move is an active move. But at the same time after takes, the difference compared to the other variations is here black cannot take on d5 with the knight, as that would ruin his queenside pawns and he would get a bad position. So he takes with the queen. And here bishop e3, for example, is an option to defend the knight on d4. I analyze knight f3, getting our knight out of the way and preparing to start an initiative on the center by playing knight c3 next move. And of course black has a few different moves here. But if we trade queens, then after rook takes, we get an active position along the d file. And after knight f5, we play knight c3, and we get our pieces out very quickly. Bishop f4, and now bishop d3, white has a small advantage. Because black's bishop on c8 is passive, and we can take the knight on f5 at the right moment, weakening black's pawns. Meanwhile, if black plays queen a5, then white has many moves. a3 is one possibility, with the idea to gain a tempo attacking the black queen by playing b4. And if he goes here, then again b4, gaining space on the queen side. And now bishop b2. And our bishop is actively placed on this diagonal, hitting g7, making it hard for black to develop. Black can play bishop d6 anyway, I guess because taking on g7 would be too risky, as after rook g8 followed by knight f4, our king on g1 could get vulnerable. So c4 is stronger, just gaining space on the queen side. And now c5, forcing black's bishop to retreat, and he becomes a bit more passive. Here, queen c2, and yeah, white has more space on the queen side, and we have active pieces. I believe we can play knight c3 or knight bd2 next. e5 is met by bishop c4, taking control of the light squares, and white follows up with knight c3 with an edge thanks to the better placed pieces. For example, here it's met by queen e4, making use of the fact that black's f7 pawn is pinned, and black has to surrender the bishop pair most likely. And then we have control over the light squares. On move 6, black can take on d4. This has been played in some games. I guess it's playable, it's not so easy to crack. But we capture, and our queen is well placed on d4, where it controls a lot of squares. In addition, it puts pressure on g7. So, if black plays knight c6, then we don't take on c6 because black gets the bishop pair. But we actually play this nice move queen c3, just retreating the queen one square away. But the main idea is to keep an eye on the g7 pawn. And so black's bishop cannot move, and because the pawn g7 is attacked and bishop cannot move, therefore black cannot castle. After queen c7, bishop e3, white just continues developing the pieces. Knight d2 is coming, bishop e2, and again knight d2 is coming, and we have a small lead in development. Black can try this move bishop d6, which is interesting. Black attacks the pawn on h2, and here I suggest f4, just a normal move. But I also want to mention this interesting forcing line queen g7. The idea is that after check, bishop e5, black attacks our queen and attacks also our pawn on b2. But after queen h6 takes, we just play knight d2 and sack this rook in return for the bishop. And it turns out that black's dark squares on the king side are extremely vulnerable, and we have an attack on dark squares. So black has to be very careful here as his king is stuck in the center at the moment. But nevertheless, f4 is a good enough reply. Black is able to castle, but it's okay. We just continue developing. With knight d2, after b5, then now e5, gaining space and preparing knight e4, and queen d3. This has been played in one game last year, or 1.5 years ago in 2019. So white played c3 because black was threatening to play knight b4 and attack our queen. So knight e4 is coming now. Black had to play d6 in order to break free. But after takes, a4 attacks the enemy queen side. b4 is not very good, as after knight c4, we attack the bishop on d6 and also the b6 square. And black has some weaknesses on the queen side. Meanwhile, after rook b8, we can take on b5, then knight e4, or the other way around. And after this nice move b4, we secure the c5 square as an outpost for our pieces. Meanwhile, black has to pay attention to the defense of the b5 pawn. And black can probably try to equalize here, but he has to defend very accurately. So after bishop f3, I like white's position because we can always put our knight to the outpost on the c5 square. And on the other hand, we can also prepare a kingside attack on the king side. We can prepare a kingside attack on black's king by transferring our queen with this maneuver, queen e1 to g3. Yeah, move 11 definitely, queen takes g7 is highly interesting. Black can play a6 first, attacking our bishop, and then our bishop retreats, and e2 is the best square for it. Because if we go to d3, when black plays knight here, and after queen c3, our queen cannot switch over to the third rank, and black can play b5, and our queen on c3 is not very well placed at the moment. So bishop e2 is a bit stronger. And after knight c6, again, we play queen c3, making it hard for black to develop his king side because the bishop cannot move. So let's say he plays d5, then we take. Black can take with the e-pawn, the idea to close the long diagonal. But nevertheless, after rook e1, black's pawn is isolated and we have some pressure on the e file. For example, after bishop e6, bishop g4 attacks the bishop. And after queen f6 takes, knight c3, black has a worse endgame because of his worse pawn structure. Black played bishop b4 in the game, but white has a number of good moves such as bishop d2 or a3. Takes, and then if black played king d7, then I assume we can just retreat the bishop. And then we get a better endgame thanks to the bishop pair and the better pawn structure. In the game, black castled, but after takes, white is a pawn up and has a clearly better endgame. Black's compensation for the pawn is insufficient. Black has to play very accurately in order to defend this endgame. But no point analyzing so far because the moves were far from forced. On move 9, black can play b5 with the idea to develop his queen side. Bishop b7 is coming. But we play bishop f4. White has other alternatives here, such as knight d2. And this has been played in the recent game. In a recent game, white played a4 and now queen g3. And the queen exerts strong pressure on g7 and along the dark squares. So black played queen v8 to trade off the queens. But after knight b3, our knight is in a well-placed position, controlling a lot of squares. And now take. And white played bishop e3. And white has a slightly better endgame because our knight on b3 is well placed. We can play knight c5 in the near future, and black has some weak squares. Here on move 10, I also analyzed bishop f4. And the idea of this move is that the bishop occupies an active square on f4, controlling the dark squares. And next, we are ready to develop our queen side by playing knight d2. Bishop e7 is bad here because black wants to castle, but now the pawn g7 is hanging. So black's idea is to play here and attack our queen, defend the rook. But after queen g3, bishop b2, knight d2, it turns out that this position is just horrible for black because his dark squares are utterly weak, king is utterly weak, and black really needs that bishop on e7. Or sorry, black really needs the dark squared bishop. So better is bishop b7, knight d2. And now black can either play queen f6 and head for a slightly worse endgame. Because after bishop e3, black has a worse pawn structure. And in addition, a4 is coming. Black has some weak squares on the queen side. And after rook g8, his threats along the FG file are not very scary because we can always play f3 and close off the long diagonal. Meanwhile, a4 is fine too. And after b4, now we can use this square for our knight. But first, white plays g3, closing off the g file. And white is better thanks to the better pawn structure. And our knight gets an outpost to the c4 square or to the b3 square. So after knight d2, rook c8 looks natural because black is threatening to win a pawn. But after a4, it turns out that the complications are in white's favor. Queen g3 was also possible here. But a4 is even stronger when the complications work out well for black. For example, after b4, just queen g3. Knight d4 is met by bishop d3, when it's too dangerous for black to grab the pawn on c2, as he falls behind severely in development. And here I think white has a number of good moves, such as rook c8, followed by knight c4, or even bishop e5. bishop c7, but rook c8 followed by knight c4 looks most natural when white should be winning. Anyway, after a4, black can try knight b4, but after queen g3, we have a lead in development, and the queen is very well placed here because it attacks the dark squares from two different diagonals, or from one diagonal and from one file. And after takes ab5, we're not really sacrificing the exchange, because if black takes, then we get this extremely powerful pawn on a6, and we have more than enough material. Black cannot even develop his kingside. So black has to play knight b4. The knight has to return, attacking our bishop. But after bishop d3, white has an extremely strong initiative in return for the pawn. Now knight e4 is threatened. And after knight e4, black had to take on e4 and give up one of the bishops. And now the pawn on a6 is hanging. And after queen b6, bishop e3. Bishop c5 was not possible because of the pin, rook f c1, pinning the bishop. And castle takes with the rook. White loses a piece. Meanwhile, as black plays knight d4, threatening knight e2 check. Then bishop d3 targets the a6 pawn. And black had to return the pawn to break the pin. But nevertheless, after rook ac1, the tactics clearly work in white's favor. For example, if black castles, then I think white can take here, followed by using the pin on the knight. Black has no tricks. Meanwhile, after knight b3, rook c4, the bishop on c5 is pinned, and black has some problems. For example, if he plays here to unpin the bishop, then we attack the rook. And white's pin along the c file and the threat of b4 is very hard to face. So yeah, black has some concrete problems due to his lack of development. On move 6, black can play knight g6 here. And this has actually been played in a number of games. So black's idea is simply to play the move bishop e7 and continue his development. And here white has some choices. I suggest bishop e2. But there are other games here as well. For example, bishop e3 with the idea of knight c3 is possible. Or alternatively, this move knight c3, which has been played in a recent game. And that game continued. Let's take a look with a6. Takes. And white retreated the bishop to the active d3 square. And next he wants to play f4. Bishop e3. And f4 came, and queen h5, and we have a threatening position on the king side. The queen is very active on h5, and after rook ad8, also rook ad1, white has a slight advantage in the recent game Medina against Anita. So our pieces are well placed, and our queen puts pressure on black's king side. On move 7, I recommend bishop e2. Although, of course, as I said, white has other good possibilities as well. But here, white moves the bishop back to its ideal location. From e2, it is safe and solid, and we control the d4 square. In addition, white just wants to play c4 next move, setting up a Maroczy-bind type of position. So after bishop e2, black generally just develops. If he attacks our knight, then this is also an option. We play knight b3. Because we have to retreat the knight. And after bishop e7, we set up our Maroczy-bind position, castle knight c3. And it's not exactly clear whether the knight on g6 is well placed or not, because usually this knight is on f6. But after we played f4, then and g3 later on, then the squares of the knight on g6 is very limited. So it's not exactly clear how black can improve the position of his knight. And after f4, bishop e3, all these moves have been quite logical. And white has the easier game thanks to the space. Black can try f5 to create counterplay. After takes, and now g3, protecting the h4 square and limiting the squares available for black's knight. And here white is preferable because our king is safe at the moment, and we have a target on d7, which we can attack by playing queen d2, followed by rook a d1. On move 8, black can retreat the bishop to b6, but after c4, threatening c5, and then now knight c3, castle. The bishop is quite actively placed on d6, but besides normal continuations, white also has this strong move knight b5, and turns out black has some problems defending the pawn on d6 because black really doesn't want to play bishop c5 and give up the bishop pair, because after bishop c5 takes, and now f4 is a nice move, preparing to play e4 e5 in order to secure the d6 square for our pieces. So after f4, if black plays a6, we get our knight to d6, and we play e5 next move. Black may try f6 to cover the e5 square, but after bishop e3, b6, rook f2, preparing to swing the rook over to the d file in the near future. White has some edge, as knight d4 can be met by simply taking, and if black takes on d4, then our knight on d6 is well protected. Meanwhile, if black takes, then bishop c3, and white has the bishop pair and slightly more space, and has the better position. Meanwhile, move 14, black can play knight d4, but after e5, we install the knight on d6, and it turns out that f6 is met by bishop e3, when after this very important move, the complications are clearly in white's favor. Because after takes, black has some problems because of his poorly developed piece on the queen side. For example, if black takes, then bishop takes, and after knight e5, our bishops are very active, and we regain the pawn. And here white has a clear edge thanks to our better pawn structure, 2 pawn islands versus 3 pawn islands, and our knight is very powerful on d6. So, on move 7, black normally plays bishop e7 with the idea to just simply castle. But again, we play c4 and set up our favored Maroczy bind position with the pawns on e4 and c4. If black castles, we play knight c3, developing our knight. And after b6, here besides the normal move bishop e3, white can also consider the move knight b3 with the idea to keep more pieces on the board. And after bishop b7, bishop e3, white is threatening to play c5 and advance on the queen side and attack black's pawns. So, meanwhile, if black plays d6, then we get this typical Maroczy bind setup where, we can play queen d2, followed by f4, and we can put our rook either to the c1 square or the d1 square. And this position is playable for both sides, but white is better because of the extra space. And the knight on g6 looks a bit misplaced to me. I think the knight is better placed on f6, in my opinion. Black can try f5 here to try to create some counterplay quickly. He takes, rook takes, and now the rook is active on the f file, and so we have to defend accurately. So actually I like on this position the move f4 to prevent black from playing knight f4 and to take control of the dark squares. And next we want to play g3, for example after rook f8 with the idea to play knight h4. and activate the knight, white plays the move g3, taking the h4 square under control and limiting the squares available for black's knight on g6. So now the knight on g6 is quite badly placed, to be honest. Black can play queen c7, attacking the pawn, when here we can play g3, but knight b5 is actually even stronger. And the point is that black wants to play rook f8 and develop, but we attack the queen first, so that if the queen retreats, then now rook f8 is no longer possible as the file is blocked, or the rank is blocked. And after rook c1, rook f8, threatening knight h4, again we play g3, preventing knight h4, and white is better as our king is safe. We can always cover the long diagonal by moving our bishop. And in addition, white is ready to start queenside operations by playing c5. So after c4, black can also take and trade a pair of knights. But then after knight c3, black should probably play b6. Bishop f6 doesn't lead anywhere because we just retreat our queen. And again, knight e5 doesn't do anything. After queen c2, the pawn on c4 is well defended. And we are ready to play bishop e3 next move to cover the dark squares. Meanwhile, after b6, white has the interesting option here of knight b5, with the idea of installing our knight to the undefended d6 square. So now after bishop b7, now either rook d1, followed by knight b6 looks very strong when the knight is very active, or alternatively white can play f4 to take control of the e5 square and gain space. And then after g3, we force the bishop to retreat to e7, and then we get this typical position where white has a stable position and some extra space, but of course this position is playable for both sides, but white is better. So on move 10, black usually plays b6. With the idea to develop the bishop on the b7 square. And black also takes control of the dark squares on the queen side. He can play bishop c5, for example, if he wants to. So after b6, we play bishop e3, developing our bishop and protecting the dark squares on this diagonal. Here black can play bishop b7, or he can also first play bishop f6 first, followed by bishop b7. And he's threatening to win a pawn because he wants to play bishop takes c3. Therefore we play f3, protecting the e4 pawn and solidly consolidating our position. For example, our recent game here continued with bishop c6, rook ac1. White's position is very stable. And now white even played rook f2, which is not necessary, but actually it's very interesting because the point is that we want to keep the second rank covered, and we want to play bishop f1, and later we can activate this rook to the d file by playing rook d2. The automatic move rook d1 here doesn't work, as after bishop e5, black creates annoying threats on this long diagonal, and after g3 black can sack a piece and get some checks. So rook f2 is actually a very nice move because black was threatening to play bishop e5, and so now bishop e5 can be simply met by f4, or alternatively by g3. Probably g3 is strongest, with the idea to cover the dark squares on our king, and now our rook can protect our king if black ever decides to sacrifice a piece. Meanwhile, after a6, white plays bishop d4, offering a trade of bishops, and if black takes, queen takes, then we have more space. Black tried to keep more pieces on the board, but now g3, and after b5, white played a3, controlling the b4 square, and white has a small advantage because we are ready to play b4 next move and gain some space on the queen side. So in this position, black can play queen e7 to develop a rook to the d8 square. White plays rook ad1, and now bishop d3. Preparing to play f4, protecting the e4 pawn, and yeah, the idea is to play f4 and gain more space. If black plays knight e5, then b3 protects the pawn on c4, and after takes, black hasn't solved all his problems yet because he's behind in space. And now bishop d4, and white has a small advantage thanks to the active bishop on d4, and in addition we are ready to expand on the king side by playing f4. So here black can play d6, and now white plays b3 to protect the c4 pawn, and after rook d8, probably f4 is an option here. In the game Snedon against Lund 2020, instead of f4, the strong white, the white player decided to play rook e1, just centralizing our rooks and putting indirect pressure on the queen along the e file. So now we discourage black into trying to open up the center. Black played h6, and now knight e2, preparing knight d4, centralizing our pieces. Now bishop f1, maintaining control over the squares on this diagonal. And after a6, queen f2, white was in no rush, so he just plays a4 to prevent b5. White's abandoning the position. Black played bishop h4, provoking a weakness on the d file or on the king side. But white just maneuvered these pieces. Later we can double rooks along the d file. Black has really no counterplay. And now f4, finally advancing the pawns. And b4, and at the moment all our pawns are well protected, and our pieces are well placed. The knight is well centralized, the rook is well centralized, and black has no counterplay. After bishop g2, and white has some advantage thanks to black's weak pawns on d6, and black cannot take on c4, as after rook takes d6, the position opens up to the bishop's favor. But of course black's position is playable. He just has slightly less space. Bishop b7 is met by rook d1, attacking the pawn on d7, and I prefer the rook using the queen's rook to place on the d1 square than playing rook sd1, because rook sd1 is also possible, putting the rooks this way. But I prefer the slightly more aggressive setup with the rooks on d1 and f1, because the idea is to be able to get the option to play f4 in the near future. So now queen d2, and we actually want to play f4 if black doesn't do anything. If black tries bishop b4, then we just play f3, defending this pawn on e4. And after queen f6, rook c1, protecting the knight. Bishop c5, g3. Black's knight on g6 is misplaced. He would like to reach the outpost on d4, but it's quite difficult to get there. After a5, rook f2, preparing bishop f1, and with the idea to double rooks along the d file. Now bishop h3 is coming. Now white has strong pressure on the d file. White can play knight b5 next move in order to increase the pressure on the d6 square, and black's position is quite passive because its knight cannot reach the powerful d4 square. On move 13, black can play bishop f6, again threatening to win the pawn. So f3 is possible here, bishop d3 is possible here to protect the e4 square. Alternatively, bishop d4 is fine as well, trading off the dark squared bishops. And then after takes, we have more space, and we just want to increase our control over the position by advancing our pawns. So f4 or b4 next move looks decent. Black can play f5 here in this kinds of position. You always have to watch out for f5 because black opens up the f file and activates the diagonal for his bishop. But after takes, rook takes is met by bishop d3 when black's threats on the king side are not scary because we attack the rook, and after rook f4 we can just play queen e3, or alternatively after queen g5 then bishop e4 is strong, trading off black's light squared bishop and taking off the poison from his attack. So after knight f4 g3, black's threats look annoying, but all our pawns are well defended. And after this nice move f3, keeping the f file closed, black's attack is deadening out because the rook on f5 is hanging, bishop on c6 is hanging. And after check king g2, we keep the f3 square protected. And after king, white has a stable edge because the pawn on e6 is weak and the pawn on c6 also. Meanwhile, black has no attack along the f file. So after he takes f5, queen g5 looks interesting, threatening mate in 1. Queen g4 is playable, of course, but I think g3 is even stronger. And we just want to close off the long diagonal with f3. If black takes with the rook, then I believe we can play f4, gaining a tempo, attacking the black queen. And after queen h6, bishop g4, black has no attack on the king side. And meanwhile, we have a dominating position on the other side. And our king is safe at the moment. Meanwhile, as black takes with the queen, then f4 is possible. Or alternatively, f3 is actually very strong here. The point is to close down the long diagonal here and prevent any tricks. If black plays knight e5, then we gain tempo. f4, attacking the knight. And if black plays queen h3, then we can close off the long diagonal by blocking it with our knight. For example, knight d5 is even possible here, closing off the long diagonal, turning knight e7 check. If knight g6, then just knight g3. Protects all the squares on the king side. And meanwhile, after e takes, c takes, we gain a tempo, attacking the bishop on c6, and black is in a bad state. So he had to take here with the bishop. But after c takes, he has a slightly worse position as our bishop is stronger than black's knight. Black can play queen h5 to try to put pressure on the f3 square. But now knight e4, we bring the knight over to the defense of the king side, and white is better. For example, after knight e7, rook f2, with the idea to protect the second rank or the f file. We can double the rooks on the f file if needed. Knight f5, queen e5, and white is better. Because after f4, white is establishing some sort of control, as black doesn't have any decisive threats. And meanwhile, Our rook is well placed on f2, protecting the second rank. In addition, our pieces are well centralized, and black's knight on e3 is active, but at the same time he has to be careful as it could get it could come under attack. So black has an abundance of alternatives, but queen b6 is his most stable. Is his most stable choice in this position. And after queen b6, we have to take on c6 because we cannot keep the bishop, as both our knight and bishop is attacked. So we take, and here black has a choice. Normally here you captures with the b pawn. I believe this is the main line here. Alternatively, you can capture with the d pawn and maintain some sort of pawn symmetry, or black can play something else. So let's see, he can also take with the knight, but the main line in this position is b takes c6. Excuse me, yeah. So b takes c6 is black's usual choice here, and probably objectively it's his best choice because it's also a combative move. Because black makes black changes the nature of the pawn structure, and he captures towards the center. Later he can fianchetto his bishop here, and his queen is active on the b6 square, from where she controls a lot of dark squares. He pins our f pawn. So after b takes, I suggest here white again has a choice of moves. So you can retreat the bishop either to the e2 square or to the d3 square, and both moves are equally good. And I actually had a hard time choosing between both bishop moves. So in the end, I decided to go for bishop d3 instead, as the bishop looks a bit more active here. While alternatively, if white plays bishop e2, he keeps the d4 square. White keeps some control over the d4 square because the d file is open. But on the other hand, on d3 the bishop is slightly more active because he controls the bishop on e4, or sorry, he controls the pawn on e4, and the bishop is slightly more active here. For example, on move 8, d5 is inadvisable here because with the bishop on d3, white gets a strong initiative after knight c3. So now white is leading in development, and knight g6 actually is pretty bad here, as after e takes d5, black cannot take with the c pawn due to the check bishop b5, and the pawn on d5 is under attack. For example, bishop d7. So bishop d7, knight takes d5, queen takes b5 loses due to the fork, and meanwhile after he takes d5, white gives a check, rook e1, and black's king runs under a very powerful attack after both bishop e7 takes, queen d5, when pawn on f7 is hanging, amongst all things, or alternatively black can play knight e7, but now he can't develop his kingside pieces, and after c4, black's king runs under a tremendous attack along the d file. For example, after d4, white has a variety of winning moves. The simplest is bishop f4, with the idea to start pushing our queenside pawns, and black's king will run under a very dangerous attack in the center. So after e takes is stronger, but after rook e1, white has strong pressure on the e file, and black has big problems. Here, bishop g5 pins the bishop, and queen h5, and white has a large advantage, as black cannot castle due to bishop e7. Bishop g5 is also not possible after bishop takes knight, and black has big problems with both bishops on e6 and g5. So after bishop d3, much more common is knight g6, just developing the knight and opening up the diagonal for his bishop. And here we play c4. White has other moves, but this is the most natural because white gains space on the center. And next move we want to play knight c3 and develop our pieces. So here black has a choice. His main line here is bishop c5 with the idea to activate the bishop and try to play bishop d4 and install the bishop there. Black can also play bishop e7, which is a calmer move with the idea to just finish his development. So after bishop e7, we play knight c3, developing our knight, and black usually castles. If he doesn't castle, he can play d6 to secure the dark squares, but this closes down the diagonal for the bishop. And after the nice move rook b1, we are ready to advance our pawns on the queen side, gaining more space on that side. For example, castle, we play b4, and white is better. For example, after queen c7, bishop e3, we control all the critical squares on this side, and next we want to play f4. c5 is met by b5 when now we have a passed b pawn, which could be very annoying. After bishop b7, rook d1, white has a slight edge because of our space advantage and our supported passed pawn here. For example, after bishop d4, white gets this, black gets this outpost on the d4 square. But after knight g3, with the idea to advance our a pawn with a4, or alternatively in the future, we can install our knight to the outpost on f5, and white has some advantage in this position. On move 12, after b4, black can play here, but now bishop e3 attacks the black queen and controls the squares on the dark squares. Queen c7, queen d2, and now white is again ready to play f4 next move, taking away the squares, taking away the e5 square from black's knight and limiting his movements. e5 again is met by b5, just gaining space. If black takes, then we get an outpost on b5 for our knight, and in addition we gain a tempo, attacking the black queen. Meanwhile, if black takes, then queen takes, black gives up the bishop pair, and it's never a good sign because our dark squared bishop becomes very active now. And after bishop e2, black has managed to give us an isolated pawn on c4, but nevertheless, white is much better thanks to our fantastic dark square control, rook c1. And we're actually following the Chinese game here. Ding Liren, China's top player and number 3 in the world, and he was playing strong grandmaster Zheng Chongqing. And black is clearly worse because his dark squares are very vulnerable, and in addition, white has the bishop pair, and Ding Liren won very shortly. On move 10, black can play bishop a6, try to put pressure on the pawn on c4 by playing knight e5. But here this actually doesn't work very well because we have this strong move c5. Black cannot take with the queen because bishop on a6 needs protection. Black cannot take with the bishop, as after knight a4 we fork black's pieces. So c5 is a nice move because we gain a tempo. And after bishop e3 we protect this pawn, and black is unable to win this pawn. After queen c2, white follows up with rook a1, and we can always protect the c5 pawn by playing knight a4 later, and black is worse. So on move 10, black normally castles short. And now white plays rook b1. Knight a4 with the idea of c5 is also a good option, fixing black's dark squares and fixing black's center. And white has some advantage after g3 because of the better pawn structure, and we want to play bishop e3 next move. Alternatively, on move 11, rook b1 is also just as strong because white wants to play b4 and advance on the queen side and gain some useful space on that flank. If black plays c5, then he closes off the long diagonal, or not the long diagonal, but he closes off the diagonal for his queen, and then white plays f4, gaining space and limiting the movement of this knight. Now bishop e3, threatening b4. B4 is probably possible here in this position also, but queen h5 is even stronger, putting extreme pressure on black's king side. After rook e8, rook s3, this rook list with the threat of rook h3 is not easy to deal with. Black's king side becomes quite vulnerable. A5 preventing our pawn advance is easily met by bishop e3, gaining a tempo on black's queen, and now queen c7 is met by f4, and white has very pleasant play. By the way, c5 is also a good move here, securing the dark squares on the queen side. After f4, rook d8, queen c2, white just slowly improves the position, and now we threaten bishop b6, and white has a large advantage. c5 is not very good here, as this gives us the b5 square for our knight. So in this position, move 11, black usually plays queen c7, rerouting his queen and threatening probably knight f4. And white plays bishop e3, and this is the ideal place for our bishop. From here, the bishop covers the c5 square and also the dark squares. And in addition, we are ready to play b4 or f4 next move, gaining space. And here black should probably play rook d8, because if he plays e5, Boris Gelfand played this move back in 2013. So he played e5, but at the same time, he lost control over the d5 square, and he's unable to break through in the center anymore. So after g3, white just protected the f4 and h4 squares and prevented black's knight from jumping to either of those squares. And now Caruana played b4, getting a space advantage on both flanks, and queen d2. And after rook c8, white played b5, and he had a large advantage thanks to the bishop pair and a large space advantage on the queen side. So here after knight b5, the knight is extremely well placed on d5, and black has problems along the b file and on the queen side. So going back on move 12, alternatively black can play here the move knight f4, and the idea is to confuse matters by threatening to grab the bishop pair. So we don't want to give up the bishop pair at the moment, so we play bishop c2, and we can kick the enemy knight next. And then black plays the move rook d8, and this idea is very concrete. Black, I think after g3, black wants to give a check here, and then play something crazy like d5, exploiting the fact that he's threatening d4 in order to regain the piece. And the position is not as clear as you would think, because white's king becomes vulnerable along the long diagonal if we take on d5. So after rook d8, white can play queen d2, followed by b4. But I'm suggesting b4 instead, with the idea to play b5 and open up the queen side. d5 in this position is not very good because white has the reply queen f3, forcing the knight to retreat, and after which we take on d5, and after c takes d5, we have the strong move rook f c1, putting pressure on the c file, and black cannot take with the d pawn as the rook on a8 is hanging, and black cannot take here on c4 thanks to this powerful tactical turn, knight takes d5. And the queen is vulnerable on the c file. In addition, queen takes d5 loses because of bishop e4, making use of the pin, and black is clearly worse. So after b4, black generally plays rook b8, but after queen d2, we advance on the queen side with b5. And black cannot take on b5, as after knight b5, we gain a tempo attacking the black queen. And if he goes to c6, then rook f c1, his queen has nowhere safe to go, and he loses material. Meanwhile, move 16, black can play knight e5 to attack his pawn. But after bishop d3, we are ready to give up the bishop pair now, because black has lost time moving his knight back and forth. And in addition, after takes, white has a large space advantage on the queen side, and we have a strong initiative on that side. So after bishop d3, knight g4 has been played in the game, attacking our bishop and threatening mate. But after bishop f4, and now nice move bishop g3, protecting our weakness on h2, and threatening to play bishop e2 next move to force black to trade bishops. And after takes, bishop e2 forces the knight to retreat. And after the fourth variation, knight d6, the knight on d6 is extremely strong, and black has problems because after rook takes, he has problems along the b file. And yeah, black is slightly worse. The pawn on a7 could become a target to later on. So on move 12, bishop e3, black's best move actually is to play here rook d8. And the idea of this move is to get counterplay on the center by advancing quickly with d7, d5, opening the d file. So here, white has to play accurately. I suggest f4, forcing the play, and this move leads to very concrete positions. If he plays e5, then we continue gaining space with f5. And after knight f4, black is planning to play a quick d7, d5 next move. And here I suggest the move queen c2, stabilizing white's position on the center by eyeing up black's queen along the c file. Black plays bishop b7, again with the idea to blast open the center. But after rook sd1, we protect the squares along the d file. Next, we're threatening bishop f1. And if black plays d5, then after cd5, we can take on d5, attacking both the queen and the bishop on e7. And after takes, e takes, we get this forcing variation, bishop takes, where white has a slightly better endgame. For example, after bishop takes, rook takes, bishop e4, we gain our material back, and black cannot play rook a d8 as the pawn on a7 will be hanging, so he has to play here. And after rook c1, we get this position by force, where white is a better endgame thanks to the queenside pawn majority. Black can probably defend this, but our rook is very active also. In addition, move 24, b4, the immediate b4, with the idea to advance quickly our pawns on the queen side, also deserves consideration when white is slightly better. So, after bishop b7, rook sd1, d5 didn't fully equalize. Meanwhile, if black takes, then after queen takes, we have firm control over the d5 square. And in this position, white is better as long as we are able to prevent d5. In addition, on move 18, rook bc1 or knight a4, threatening bishop b6 is probably even stronger. When after rook a6, we need to. Black is unable to break through with b5, and white is preferable. So black can play d5 move for 13, and this is black's best way to create some sort of counterplay in the center. And actually, I'm suggesting a very concrete line here. So it's takes, taking on d5 twice, and now queen h5, which is a very important move for white. From here, the queen puts pressure on the d5 square, and also on h7. And in some cases, we are preparing to launch a quick attack on the king side by advancing our f-pawn. In addition, d4 here doesn't work out well because of the move knight d5, attacking black's queen. And this leaves black no time to consolidate, because if he takes, the rook on a8 is hanging. So after queen d6, we grab the bishop on e7, and we get this position where white has the bishop pair, and the position is also much better. So black's best move here is bishop c5 in order to trade off the dark squared bishops. And now white plays king h1, and we get this simple position where white is threatening rook e1 followed by f5, starting an attack on the king side. So black needs to play carefully. In the game that we're following, black played knight f8, trying to improve the position of his knight. And here white played rook bd1, but instead I'm suggesting the move f5, which is much more concrete. And the idea is to attack on the king side quickly with f6, and this forces black to defend very accurately. Now we're threatening f takes g7, ruining black's pawns, so he has to play here. But after rook e1, black needs to play the only move queen f8 to defend against the mate. And after queen h4, black is able to defend his king side at the moment thanks to the well-placed queen on f8. But nevertheless, he still has to defend accurately. And d4 is actually the only move here that doesn't lose. But nevertheless, I still like white's position after knight e4 when the initiative looks quite dangerous. The immediate knight c5 loses because of the piece sacrifice bishop g6. And now rook e3, and mate is unstoppable after g4. Black has no defense due to rook h3. So yeah, bishop e7 on move 9 is definitely playable for black. And the position gets a bit concrete. But bishop c5 looks more natural and is more common. So black plays bishop c5, and the idea is he fights for control over the dark squares, and he wants to install a bishop on d4. It's possible. So white plays knight c3, with the idea to play knight a4 and trade off black's dark squared bishop. So black plays queen c7. Bishop d4 is met by rook b1, with the idea to play knight e2 and attack black's bishop. So after castle knight e2, bishop c5 is bad for black due to their play b4. When we gain a foothold on the queen side, black cannot take on b4 because of the pin. Meanwhile, after rook b1, black plays a5 to prevent b4. But here after knight a4, and now black has a choice because his queen is attacked, and he usually plays queen a7 to keep control over the c5 square. Alternatively, black can play queen c7, which I actually faced in a recent game against a very strong American Grandmaster, Jeffrey Chong. So Jeffrey played queen c7 and I played c5 to take control over the dark squares here. And after castle, I played rook e1 with the idea to trade off his dark squared bishop by playing bishop e3. Jeffrey played d6, but after bishop e3, white has a nice and stable advantage thanks to the well-placed knight on c5. And after rook d1 followed by bishop c4, I challenged the position of the rook on d4 and black was unable to equalize. The bishop on c4 and the knight on c5 is extremely well placed, and black is unable to hang on to his outpost on d4 because white is going to take it next move. So queen c7 is not enough to equalize, and queen a7 seems more natural because black supports the c5 square and later he wants to play d6. So actually in this position, I'm suggesting a very interesting pawn sacrifice, and that move is c5, sacrificing a pawn for the dark squared initiative. Black has to take, otherwise queen c2 defends the pawn. And after bishop e3, black won a pawn, but his dark squares are very vulnerable, and in addition, white may continue next move with f4 or with rook c1, threatening bishop c5. And after knight f4, rook c3, this has been played in the game. White is threatening bishop c5. Black's dark squares are quite weak. And after e5, white even gets his extra option. White has a strong initiative. Black's pawn on d7 is backwards. And after queen d2, with the idea to recapture this pawn on f4, the pawn isn't easy to defend at all. And black has difficulties in this position. Our pawn on e5 controls a lot of squares, and our pieces are active. So on move 10, queen c7 has been played, and again white plays knight a4, immediately fighting for control over the c5 square and planning to advance with c5 next move. White's other moves here on move 11, king h1, with the idea of f4, or rook b1, threatening b4. I must say, they're also pretty reasonable for white. But let's take a look at knight a4. The bishop goes here, and again we play c5 before black does so. So now the position of the bishop on d4 is quite unstable. And if castle, again we play rook e1. Our idea is to play bishop e3 to remove the enemy bishop from its powerful outpost. For example, d6 transposes to move 12 d6. Meanwhile, after e5, bishop e3, we get rid of this blockading bishop on d4, and white has a small but lasting edge. For example, after rook d8, white plays bishop f1 with the idea to control the d-file by playing rook d3. And after d5 takes, followed by rook d3, white gets a small but lasting advantage. Takes, the knight is well placed on a4, can jump to the c5 square. And after queen c3, followed by knight c5, white has a better pawn structure. In addition, in some lines, we can play f4 to try to get rid of the annoying knight on d4. So move 12, d6 is possible, and after takes. Again, we play rook e1 with the obvious idea of placing our bishop to the e3 square and challenging the bishop on d4. And after castles, bishop e3. After castles, bishop e3, black has a choice. He can defend the bishop, or he can trade on e3, but after rook takes e3, followed by queen c2. Again, white has the better pawn structure. After queen c2, we take control of the c5 square. And now g3, taking control of the squares, taking it away from black's knight. And white is slightly better because black's queenside pawns are split and his knight is badly placed, rook c1, and white has strong pressure along the c file and the a file. In addition, if black plays knight f8, we can play bishop h3. So that if black places his knight here, we can just chop it off and prevent him from getting to the d4 outpost. Alternatively, on move 15, black can play e5, which is possible. For example, white can play g3 here to take control of the f4 square, followed by takes, and then either f4 or b3 first. And here white has a small advantage as we have a blockade on d3 and rook ac1 is coming, and white is preferable. Alternatively, after e5, we can take right away. And after he takes d4, white plays rook c1, securing the c5 square for our knight. And black has some counterplay, but it's not enough. And after f4, our knight gets this amazing blockading square on d3. And black's counterplay is not sufficient. I mean, he has a passed pawn on d3, but it's well blocked. And the knight on c5 is in a very powerful square. In addition, we are ready to attack with e5 followed by e6 next move, and black has some problems. On move 15, black can play c5 to be able to recapture on d4 with his pawn, but we don't have to take on d4 right away. So instead, we play bishop f1 with the idea to attack the c5 pawn by playing rook c1, or alternatively by playing queen c2. And after rook d8, queen c2 hits the pawn on c5, and it's not easy for black to defend this pawn. Meanwhile, after rook d8, let's see, we can probably play rook c1 here. Yeah, I analyzed b3, but alternatively on move 17, I think rook c1 is even stronger, just to update my analysis a little bit. So the idea is to attack the pawn on c5, which is impossible to defend. And now after black's best defense, b3, the pawn on c5 is falling. And after bishop e3, queen d6, we get a better endgame. After king f2, black has this trick. But after the move rook ed1, we win the fight for the d file. And white is threatening rook d8. And after knight takes c5, white has a clearly better endgame. Thanks to our queenside pawn majority and our active pieces, our king can quickly come to the e3 square, and white has good winning chances in this endgame. So rook c1 is even stronger than b3, but b3 is also possible. So on move 7, b takes c6 is the main line for black, and he has some small problems, I must say, but if he plays accurately and defends well, then he should be able to equalize. On move 7, if black captures with the knight, then we don't have to give up our bishop. So we just play knight c3, defending the bishop, and then we play bishop e3 next move. finishing up our development. For example, after bishop e7, bishop e3, we attack the queen, and now f4, we get this very stable setup with our pawns well advanced. And then we place our bishop to the most natural square on d3, and if black ever castles, then he's going to run under a serious attack after queen h5. So it makes sense for him to delay castling. But white plays a3, just a small prophylactic move, taking away the b4 square from black's pieces. So now after queen h5, knight b4 is no longer possible, with the idea to grab our bishop. And if black plays b4, this is just met by knight a4, when the dark squares on the queen side are vulnerable. And after knight h5, king h1, knight c4, black is trying to create counterplay. But after bishop d4, white is much better. The pressure on g7 is annoying, and black's king side is quite vulnerable. So yeah, move 7, knight takes e6 is playable, but it's not often played because after knight c3 followed by bishop e3, white generally gets easy play. Black's king side doesn't have too many defensive pieces. Meanwhile, queen takes b5 on move 8 is not very good because we don't have to take on e7. We can actually play knight d4, gaining a tempo, attacking the black queen, forcing her to retreat. And so we gain a lot of time, and we have a lead in development. And now our knights are extremely well placed in the center, and we have the initiative. Now bishop e3, and after knight c6, we can play f4, and white is ready to start a powerful kingside initiative. For example, after bishop e7, f5, black is in trouble because f6 is a threat here, and black's bishop on c8 is very passive. It does not contribute to the defense. After castle, black loses because of f6, rook takes, and the attack on the king side is just decisive. Queen h4, queen d8 even loses to the beautiful move knight d5. And the idea of this piece sacrifice is that after e takes, knight takes, d takes c6 no longer covers the d4 square, and white wins after bishop d4 because black is unable to defend his dark squares on the king side, and he loses material. On move 7, d takes c6 has been played in quite a number of games, and this move is a solid reply. But it's probably just behind b takes c6 in terms of popularity. But this move is solid because black gets a symmetrical pawn structure, and if he gets e5 later on, his position will look very stable. So after d takes c6, again, white has a choice where to retreat the bishop. I decided to recommend bishop c4, but bishop d3 or bishop e2 are also both playable alternatives, and it's hard to say exactly why one is stronger than the other or which one is the strongest objectively. But I chose bishop c4 because the bishop takes up an active position on this diagonal, and we discourage black from pushing his e-pawn. As after e5, the f7 square becomes vulnerable, and we can attack it by playing queen f3. So after bishop c4, we discourage black from advancing his e-pawn, and he usually replies with knight g6 first to finish the kingside development. But white plays king h1, sliding the king to the corner, away from the g1 a7 diagonal, and therefore we can consider advancing our pawn, our f-pawn 2 squares next move. Now black has a choice. He can play bishop e7, when white plays f4, just gaining space, and black castles, and f5 is not yet a threat here, as black gets the powerful e5 square for his knight. So here I suggest instead a4, just gaining space on the queen side and securing the b5 square for ourselves. Let's see, for example, queen c7, knight c3, and now queen h5, and this is the best square for our queen because she's very active here. Bishop e3, bishop b7 is not possible here, as after f5, black's light squares become very vulnerable. Meanwhile, as black plays bishop d6, where he hopes to provoke us into advancing, but he does lose a couple of tempi, and after knight e4, the knight is extremely well placed here, and white starts an attack on the king side after rook f3, followed by rook g3. So in move 11, black can play rook d8 when queen h5 is an option here, placing the queen on an active position. Alternatively, white can play queen e2 instead. White just improves the position of his pieces. Next, he can play knight c3 and develop our knight. So in one game, black played here bishop f6, provoking us to advance with e5. But on this square, the bishop doesn't control the a3 square. So bishop f6 was in an inaccuracy, and probably black's best hope is to play bishop d7, developing the bishop. Nevertheless, after knight c3, he is behind in space. After bishop f6, this gives white the extra option of playing rook a3, and this rook leap is extremely powerful. Black cannot take on b2 because clearly rook b3 wins material. Meanwhile, white is ready to play rook h3 next and start an attack on the king side. For example, after queen c7, e5 followed by rook h3, and this rook lift on the third rank is very dangerous, and black's king runs under a tremendous attack after queen h5. Meanwhile, the immediate e5 here makes sense because black prevents us from advancing. But after queen f3, it's not so easy to defend the pawn on f7, as black cannot castle. And after rook d1, now black cannot play bishop d6 because the pawn on f7 would be hanging. Meanwhile, black can play knight f4 as in one game to try to cover the f7 square. If he plays bishop c5 here, with the idea to castle short, this actually loses by force. Thanks to this nice trick, bishop takes f7 check. And after takes, we have this fantastic move rook d8. And if black takes our rook, then we grab the queen. And if he goes here, then check. And black gets mated. So yeah, e5 is quite a poor move here. As after queen f3, black has some problems developing because of the weakness of the f7 square, and knight f4 doesn't do much because after takes, we have this very strong move e5, sacrificing a pawn, but in return we open the e-file, and after queen b3, black has to defend very accurately in order to survive. But nevertheless, this position is just bad for black because the king is badly placed and black's bishops are passive. So yeah, king h1 with the idea of f4. Against king h1, black's best move is probably to play queen c7. And he wants to play bishop d6, and from d6 the bishop is more active. So we play f4 in order to take control of the dark squares before black is able to play bishop d6. But black goes to d6 anyway, and his idea is that he wants us to provoke playing e5, and therefore we lose we lose the validity of our central pawns, and in addition, we lose the option to play f5. So bishop d6 is an interesting move. White can play queen f3 here or g3 in order to keep the structure, but I see no reason why not to gain further space on the center if black allows us to win a tempo. So e5 wins a tempo, attacking the bishop. And now knight c3. Our knight is ready to jump to the b5 to the e4 square, and white is ahead in space. And if black castles short, this move is very dangerous, as we get an option to attack on the king side quickly, thanks to this nice move rook f3. And this rook list can be very dangerous in the right circumstances, such as now, because rook h3 is coming, and we get a strong attack on h7. For example, here, bishop d3, followed by rook h3. And queen h5 is coming, and white's attack is too strong. So after h6, queen h5, the attack is too strong. If knight f8, black loses because of rook g3. When queen takes h6, it's unstoppable. And king h8 hangs this pawn. In fact, black's only move here is rook takes d3, but he needed to get rid of the light square bishop. But then black's compensation for the exchange is not enough. And after the nice move rook g1, overprotecting the g2 square, black has some compensation for the exchange. But after knight g3, with the idea to play f5 and open up the position, our pawn on g2 is well protected thanks to the two rooks, and white is better. Another alternative on move 12 is to play b5 immediately, and this makes some sense because black wants to find Cheto his light square bishop, and he delays castling. But now we play queen h5, putting some pressure on black's position, and in some cases we can consider advancing our f-pawn with f5 and open up the position. Black can play b4, but then he weakens the light squares on the queen side, and we get the option to play bishop b5 check, disrupting black's king. After king f8, the king is stuck on the center, and white is the powerful pawn sacrifice knight d6, with the idea to generate a strong attack on the king. Bishop e3 is coming, and rook ad1 is coming. And white has sufficient compensation for the pawn, as black's king is misplaced, and it's not very easy for him to consolidate. So after queen h5, white is actually threatening to advance the f-pawn and play f5. So black should play knight h4, and this is a solid move because it attacks g2, black prepares knight f5, and so on and so forth. So white plays bishop e3, developing our bishop, and after g6, queen e2, followed by knight e4. Black's position is playable. White is slightly better, but no more than that. And after knight e4, c5, black opens up the long diagonal for his bishop. So we actually have to be a bit careful because black has some pressure on g2. And therefore we play bishop f2 because white needs to keep a close eye on the enemy knight on h4, because he attacks the g2 square and he's quite close to our king. So this maneuver with bishop e3 followed by bishop f2 is a very good one to remember with the knight on h4, because now we can chop up this knight whenever we want to. And after castle, rook ac1 followed by c3, we've been following the game Kuba against Cerner, and the position is very complex, but I think white's position is slightly better because after the nice move book AC1 and C3. We put some pressure on the C file, and we attack black's pawn on C5. And black has to play carefully in this position. For example, after queen A5, white has a variety of options, such as knight F6 check to grab black's bishop pair, or alternatively king G1 with the idea to harass black's knight on F5 by playing the move G4. Looks quite interesting. So B5 is not an easy move to crack. Alternatively, the other choice is B6. Black delays castling short, but yeah, again, black's idea is very clear cut. He just wants to fianchetto his light-squared bishop and try to activate it along the long diagonal. So here white has an interesting choice. I analyzed queen H5. White's other main response here, and also looking very good, is to play this interesting move G3. So this move has been suggested by the computer. I don't think it has been played yet. But the idea of this move is to take the H4 square under control and prevent black's knight from ever jumping to the H4 square. And if black plays bishop B7 to occupy the long diagonal, then you may consider H4 as an interesting move. And yeah, next our king gets to the H2 square, and black's knight has limited squares. And after king gets to H2, then we get a safe position. And after B5, just bishop D3, followed by queen E2. And then we get this interesting position where white has slightly better chances, because we can take king H2 and queen E2, and we have no problems as of the moment. At least the long diagonal is well covered after queen E2. So G3 is interesting. The other option is to play queen H5 as I analyze, with the idea to start an attack. For example, bishop B7 is a big mistake, as after F5, black gets under a very strong attack. For example, if takes, E6, or even queen takes F5. Meanwhile, after knight takes E5, black loses because of the pin, bishop F4. And in addition, queen takes E5 loses by force because of bishop G5, followed by bringing the rook over and just attacking all out. And the complications work really well in white's favor after queen H3. But white already has a number of wins here on move 16. Probably F takes G6 is even stronger, with this insane idea that after F takes G6, queen H3, or queen D1, followed by rook E1. And funnily enough, black's king cannot castle on either side of the board because we control the open files on the F file and the D file. So white wins here by force because rook E1 is a threat and black is unable to defend his king. So after queen H5, black has to play knight H4, and this is usually his best response against queen H5 because he covers the F5 square and he prepares to play G6. So after queen knight H4, black has to defend accurately because after knight E4, our knight is very well placed on E4 and we're threatening knight E6 check. So black has to play G6 to force our queen to retreat. And here queen G4 could be an option, but I analyzed queen E2, which is a nice solid place for the queen. And after bishop B7, I analyzed B3, with the idea of activating our dark squared bishop on the long diagonal A1 H8 in preparation for an attack. So this has been played in one game, and black castled And white has other moves here, but knight f6 is interesting, with the idea to start an attack on the king side. For example, after takes, black's dark squares are a bit vulnerable, and c5 can be met by rook f2, a very important move, just protecting the pawn, and white is slightly better, but both sides need to be accurate. So after bishop b2, with the idea of bishop e5, the position is quite unclear. But here I analyze king g1, bishop e5, and and here either bishop d3 or the immediate h3, with the idea to attack on the king side with g4, and this looks very dangerous for black. Alternatively, if black doesn't take on f6, he can also take king g7, and now we can continue normally, such as queen f2, bishop b2. But black was doing alright here after c5, because his bishop is very active, and the knight on f5 is very solidly placed. So in this position, I analyzed a very tricky move f5, which is tricky for black to defend. The pawn sacrifice doesn't lead to any advantage, but the play becomes very concrete, and black needs to defend his king side very actively. The point is that if black doesn't take the pawn, then we are able to open up the f file and secure the f6 square for our knight. And after rook f2, our knight on f6 remains very annoying. Meanwhile, our king side is quite safe at the moment. After rook d1, threatening rook d7, takes queen e1, and now white is threatening rook d2 or bishop g5, and white should be better in this position thanks to the weakness of black's dark squares and the well-placed knight on f6. Meanwhile, if black takes the pawn, white's idea is that after bishop d3, the f-file is open, and we can take on f5 next move with a powerful attack. So actually, accepting the pawn sacrifice is probably not the best move for black. c5 is stronger, but nevertheless the position remains quite tricky. And the point of playing bishop d3 is we are ready to take on f5 next move. Takes, and we have this very strong move, rook takes f5, and that was the entire point of the pawn sacrifice. Black's king runs under a tremendous attack. For example, after g takes f5, white plays this fantastic move, bishop g5. And black has no defense to the threat of queen h5 and mate. For example, rook h8 loses to the fantastic bishop h6. And then check, and mate. So black is actually completely lost after bishop g5. For example, after takes, black gets checkmated after rook f1, threatening rook f3. And now rook f3, and black has no defense to this rook lift after rook h3. And this line is very forcing, but black is checkmated in 3 moves after queen h4 and queen h5. So this entire variation starting with knight f6 is very complicated and concrete. White basically starts an attack on black's weak dark squares, starting with f5, and this is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous position for black, because after takes, then bishop takes f5 is a threat, and the knight on f6 is very powerfully placed. For example, after takes, black cannot take on f6 as his king becomes stranded on the center. But meanwhile, if here it reads with king g8, then after bishop f4, followed by rook ad1, white has an extremely strong position also on the dark squares. But yeah, again, it's a matter of choice. Here on move 13, white is a good choice between g3 with the idea of h4, or alternatively queen h5 with the idea of knight e4. Leads to interesting positions. So that being said, on move 12, probably b5 is the most stubborn move for black here, with the idea of activating the light squared bishop along the long diagonal. But nevertheless, I think the lines I analyzed with queen h5 leads to quite interesting positions for both sides. So yeah, this entire variation with e6 leads to interesting and complex positions. And I hope you learned something in this chapter. And thanks for watching this video. Again, white has an abundance of possibilities on basically every move in the opening. But I believe this line with d4 can pose black some interesting problems to solve over the board. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And goodbye for now.